The greatest king on earth stood above a city that seemed to touch heaven itself. Yet the higher he rose, the closer he drifted toward a scoot no army could prevent, no fortress could withstand, and no power could command into retreat. Babylon shimmered beneath him, golden walls stretching endlessly, gardens suspended like miracles in the air, nations gathered under his rule, while Nebuchadnezzar breathed in the illusion that he had become more than human, something eternal, something untouchable. But in the silence of night, when the cheers faded and the torches dimmed, a different kingdom emerged inside his mind, one shaped not by stone or conquest, but by shadows, where a towering tree filled the earth, only to be cut down by a voice he could neither see nor silence. The dream clung to him, unsettling and persistent, whispering of a power greater than his own, a force that did not negotiate, did not fear, and did not forget. How could the ruler of nations be threatened by something unseen, something that did not wield swords or armies, yet spoke with a finality that made even kings tremble? For what is more terrifying than losing a crown is losing the very mind that wears it. And what if the true fall of a king is not when he is overthrown by men, but when heaven itself decides he must learn by becoming less than the lowest of them? Babylon did not merely stand as a city. It declared itself as the crown of human achievement, where walls rose like mountains forged by ambition, gates gleamed with impossible wealth, and every stone whispered the name of the king who had built it all, Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of rulers. Armies marched at his command with mechanical precision. Nations bent their knees without question, and captives from distant lands were brought into his service, their languages and cultures swallowed into the vast machine of his empire. Among them stood Daniel, a quiet presence in a court filled with noise, whose wisdom did not come from flattery or fear, but from a source Nebuchadnezzar could neither control nor fully comprehend. The king surrounded himself with magicians, astrologers, and advisors who echoed his greatness back to him, crafting a world where doubt was silenced and pride was reinforced, where every success became proof that he alone shaped destiny. He built monuments not just to celebrate victory, but to immortalize himself, carving his name into stone as if permanence could be forced into existence, as if glory could be secured by sheer will. Yet beneath the grandeur, subtle fractures formed, revealed in restless nights and lingering thoughts he refused to entertain, moments where silence felt heavier than applause. Still, he chose the elevation over reflection, standing above all men with unwavering certainty, unaware that the higher he placed himself, the further he would have to fall. The dream returned with a force that refused to be ignored, unfolding before Nebuchadnezzar with terrifying clarity as a tree unlike any other rose from the center of the earth, its height piercing the heavens, its branches stretching across the horizon, offering shelter to beasts and birds, feeding all who lived beneath its shadow. It was not merely a tree. It was a kingdom, alive and unshakable, its roots deep, its presence absolute, a reflection of everything Nebuchadnezzar believed himself to be. Then the sky split with authority, and a watcher descended, not with chaos but with command, declaring in a voice that carried judgment without hesitation, the tree must be cut down, stripped, scattered, reduced, yet its stump would remain, bound and waiting, as if mercy still lingered within the sentence. Nebuchadnezzar awoke shaken, not by confusion, but by recognition, as though something deep within him already understood what his mind refused to accept. His court was summoned, yet the voices that once affirmed him now faltered, their interpretations empty, their confidence shattered by a dream that did not belong to human understanding. Only Daniel stepped forward with reluctant clarity, his silence heavier than fear, revealing the truth that the tree was the king himself, and that the fall it foretold could only be avoided if pride gave way to humility. The warning lingered in the air, clear and urgent, yet unanswered, as Nebuchadnezzar stood at the edge of change and chose to remain exactly where he was. Time moved forward, but the warning did not move him, as days turned into months, and Nebuchadnezzar slowly buried the memory of the dream beneath layers of achievement, convincing himself that what had shaken him was nothing more than a passing shadow. Babylon expanded under his command, its walls reinforced, its beauty intensified, its presence magnified until it seemed less like a city and more like a statement that human power, when perfected, needed no higher authority. He walked through his courts with renewed confidence, commissioning new structures, inscribing his victories into stone, ensuring that every pillar and gate testified not just to his reign, but to his supremacy over time itself. Yet moments of interruption still appeared, subtle and unwelcome. A beggar reaching out only to be dismissed, a quiet glance from Daniel that carried more weight than words, a fleeting echo of the dream that surfaced only to be silenced by pride. Instead of softening, his heart hardened, transforming caution into defiance, as though ignoring the warning could rewrite it, as though denial could delay what had already been declared. The kingdom mirrored its king, growing outward in splendor while inwardly shifting toward instability, loyalty driven more by fear than devotion, strength sustained more by control than truth. And so he climbed higher, onto the roof of his palace, above all voices and all doubts, unaware that he had reached the final height from which there was only one direction left to go. From the highest point of his palace, where the entire empire stretched beneath him like a living map of his own ambition, Nebuchadnezzar gazed out over Babylon, his eyes tracing every tower, every wall, every monument that bore the mark of his will. The city shimmered in the light, a masterpiece of human achievement, and in that moment, the silence around him felt like agreement, as though creation itself affirmed what he was about to declare. "Is not this great Babylon," he began, his voice steady with conviction, "that I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" A statement not just of pride, but of ownership over everything seen and unseen. The words had barely left his lips when reality itself seemed to interrupt, as a voice descended from heaven with a finality that shattered the illusion instantly, declaring that the kingdom had departed from him. Confusion flashed across his face, quickly overtaken by something deeper as the ground beneath his identity gave way, and the certainty that once defined him dissolved into something unrecognizable. In a single, irreversible moment, the king who stood above all men was cast down, stripped not only of his throne, but of the very mind that made him who he was. He was no longer led by royal guards or surrounded by advisors, but driven out into the open fields like something unwanted, his crown replaced by confusion, his voice reduced to incoherent murmurs as the world he once ruled continued without him. Rain fell on him without shelter, soaking into skin that had once been anointed with oil, while his hands, once raised to command nations, dug into the earth for food, grasping at grass as though survival had replaced sovereignty. Seasons turned with quiet indifference, the sun scorching him by day and the cold pressing into his bones by night, until time itself lost meaning and memory blurred into instinct, leaving behind a man who no longer remembered he had been king. The one who built monuments to secure his legacy became a living contradiction of it, forgotten beyond the palace walls, his name no longer spoken with certainty, as if the empire itself had begun to erase him. Daniel's warning lingered like an echo beneath the silence, not spoken aloud, but embedded within the unraveling of everything Nebuchadnezzar had once believed unshakable, revealing that the fall had never been sudden, it had been chosen. Animals moved around him without fear, sharing the same ground, the same existence, as the man who once stood above them all, completing the reversal that stripped away every illusion of superiority. Yet within the emptiness, something began to stir, not power, not pride but awareness, fragile and unfamiliar, as his eyes slowly lifted toward the sky, searching for something he had spent his entire life refusing to see. For a long time, the sky had been nothing more than distance to him, something above his reach, something irrelevant to a man who believed he had already ascended as high as existence allowed. But now, broken and stripped of everything, it became the only place left to look. Nebuchadnezzar, once lost in instinct and silence, slowly lifted his eyes upward, not with the confidence of a king, but with the hesitation of someone who no longer trusted himself, as though even this small movement required surrender. In that fragile moment, something shifted, not around him but within him, as clarity began to return like light breaking through a storm, restoring not just his thoughts but his understanding of what had always been true. He saw it then, not with his eyes alone, but with a recognition that cut deeper than vision, that there was a kingdom greater than Babylon, a rule untouched by time, a sovereignty that did not rise and fall with human power. The confrontation was not with an enemy to defeat, but with a truth he could no longer deny, as the weight of his pride gave way to the realization that everything he had claimed as his own had always belonged to another. And so, in the quiet of the open field, with no throne beneath him and no audience before him, Nebuchadnezzar surrendered, not through force, but through acknowledgement, declaring that the Most High alone rules over all. In losing everything, he finally understood, and in that understanding, the man who had once tried to become more than human became, at last, fully restored within. The change did not arrive with spectacle, but with quiet certainty, as the same mind that had once been lost returned to him, not as it was before, but renewed, clear, grounded, and no longer anchored in pride. Servants and officials, who had long since accepted his absence as permanent, began to hear whispers of his restoration, and with cautious disbelief, they came to find the king not as a broken remnant, but as a man who now carried a different kind of authority. He was brought back into Babylon, not with the triumphant procession of conquest, but with a reverence shaped by what could not be explained, as those who once feared his power now witnessed something greater, his transformation. The throne remained, the kingdom endured, yet Nebuchadnezzar no longer viewed them as extensions of himself, understanding now that power was entrusted, not possessed, and that sovereignty ultimately belonged to the one he had once ignored. He spoke openly of what had happened, not to restore his image, but to declare a truth he could no longer contain, acknowledging before all that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men. Where pride had once defined him, humility now guided him, reshaping not only how he ruled, but who he had become. And in that transformation, the kingdom found stability once more, not because its king had regained control, but because he had finally surrendered it. Nebuchadnezzar's story did not end with his restoration, but with his testimony, as the man who once filled Babylon with his own name now filled it with a declaration that would outlive every wall and monument he had ever built. His words carried a different weight now, no longer commands to be obeyed, but truths to be remembered, as he proclaimed that all power is temporary, all kingdoms are passing, and that the Most High alone reigns without end. What he had lost became part of what he left behind, a living warning etched not in stone, but in memory. That pride does not elevate, it isolates, and that the fall of a man often begins long before it is seen. The image shifts beyond Babylon, moving through time into the present, where ambition still builds towers, where success still whispers the same ancient lie, that control belongs to those who seize it. In boardrooms, in cities, in quiet personal victories, the spirit of Babylon echoes, asking the same question Nebuchadnezzar once answered wrongly. Is this not mine? And yet, his story interrupts that question, reminding us that what we build can be taken, what we claim can be undone, and that identity rooted in pride will always stand on fragile ground. The final image lingers on a man looking toward the sky, not in defiance, but in reverence, revealing that true greatness is not found in rising above others, but in recognizing the one above all.